Miss Melton here to talk to you about comparing decimals. You know how to compare and order whole numbers. Today, let's learn how to use decimal place value to compare and order decimals. So think about some items that cost less than $1. Out of those items, what costs the least? Which one costs the most? Maybe less than $1 a can of soda, 75 cents maybe. And maybe one piece of bubble gum is 25 cents. So 25 cents is less. You're already comparing decimals. So let's look at these numbers at the top. I'm going to pull this down. 0.67, 0.7, 0.66. Which of these numbers is the greatest and how do you know? It's really important not to just be able to name them, but to be able to explain how you know which one is the greatest or the least. So for this one, which is the greatest? Let's think. Well, I see this number has a 7 and this number has a 7 in it, whereas this only has two sixes. So I can think about when I make the decimals, this would be 6 rods, 4, 5, 6, and then 7 little units. And this would be, it's in the tens place, so it's 7 rods. 6, 7, and this would be 6 rods, and then 6 units. So I can see that 7 rods is going to be more than 6 rods and some units. So 0.7 is the greatest, and that is 7/10. So I drew it, that's how I knew, but I could also think about equivalent decimals, and I know 7/10 is equivalent to 70 hundredths. Or I could think about it like money, 70 cents. So 70 70 cents is more than 66 cents or 67 cents. So we think about, is 67 greater than 7? Is 67 hundredths greater than 7/10? So you can't just think of it like whole numbers anymore because it's not 7, it's 7/10, which is the same as 70 hundredths. So think about how you read the decimals, 0 and 67 hundredths, 0 and 7/10. Let's continue to look at how we can tell which is the greatest number. So we could draw it, we can make equivalent decimals. We can also look at place value. Which place value is the greatest? Well, the ones place is the greatest, but they all have 0 in them. So now I move to the next place value, just like I would if I was comparing whole numbers. The next to the right is the next biggest, and it is right behind the decimal, and that's the tens place. So I have a 6, a 7, and a 6. So the 7/10, is greater than 6/10. So I can draw, can use place value, I can read the number, I can think about money, and I can also make equivalent decimals. They have the same tenths, so how many hundredths do they each have? So if they were the same, so once I have figured out this 7/10 is the most, now I can look at the next, what is the next greatest number? This is 6/10, 6/10. So I look at the hundredths, 7 hundredths, 6 hundredths. So this would be the greatest, this would be the second greatest, and this would be the least because 7 hundredths is bigger than 6 hundredths. So now that we know 67 hundredths is greater than 66 hundredths, now we can order them from greatest to least. So we already knew 7/10 is the greatest, then 67 hundredths, then 66 hundredths. And we can also order them from least to greatest. 66 hundredths, 67 hundredths, and 7/10. Now you try ordering these 3 numbers from greatest to least and pause your video, and then when you are ready, press play to check your work. So for the greatest, I'm going to look at my whole numbers. I have 1, 2, and 2. So I know the 2 is bigger than the 1. So I'm going to look at the tenths place. I have a 4 and a 5. Well, this would be 5 rods, and that's 50 hundredths. There's an invisible 0 there, which is bigger than 48. So the biggest would be 2.5, then 2.48, and then 1.48 would be the least. So total, I have 2 and 5 tenths, 2 and 48 hundredths, 1 and 48 hundredths, from greatest to least. Baseball rank players according to their batting averages, which is their number of hits divided by the number at bats. This is from the 2013 Major League Baseball batting average leaders when this was made. So Kadire was this amount, and then Carpenter, Cabrera, and Worth. So we can use hundredths grids to compare the players, or if you wanted to make it with base 10 blocks, that's what we're going to do. So let's first do Kadire's, which is 3,300. So that's 3 rods, 3 tenths, and then 3 units. Carpenter is 3 rods, 3 tenths, and just 1. Cabrera is 3 rods and 5. And then Worth is 3 tenths and 2 hundredths. So now I can compare these, which one is the greatest to the least. So who is the batting average leader? So you can see Cabrera has the most filled in. So he is the leader. He's in first. See if you can figure out the order of the other 3. So the next one would be Kadire at second, Worth third, and Carpenter at fourth. Let's practice comparing decimals like we do whole numbers. So you know greater, less than, equal to 133 is less than 137. So what did you look at when you compared the two numbers? Well, we looked at place value. You can do the same thing with decimals, just make sure you're comparing the same place. So I have ones and ones, that's the same. And then 3 tenths, that's the same. So then I go to the hundredths, 3 hundredths, 7 hundredths. So again, when you're looking at comparing numbers, you can look at place value. You could draw it using base 10 blocks. You can make equivalent decimals, or you can read it or think about money, and that might help you too. So pause the video and see if you can figure out greater, less than, or equal to on these decimals, and then you may press play to check your answers. So you should have your answers written down, and this is 100th, and this is 1/10. 1/10 is bigger. This is 7 and 31 hundredths is greater than 7 and 29 hundredths. 6 and 56 hundredths is greater than 5. 1 and 1/10, 1 and 1/10, 1 and 10 hundredths. Those are equal because there's an invisible 0 here. My equivalent decimals. 3 ones in the ones place, 4, so that's less than. 9 and 9 in the ones is the same, and then I have 0 in the tenths and 1 in the tenths. So 1/10 is bigger than 100th. 2, 1, greater than. 0, 1, less than. Hopefully you got those all right, and you can move on to the practice comparing decimals.